Today we're going back to Leeds, England in 1838 for a story about a crime that seems simple on the surface, but is anything but. This is the heartbreaking case of Margaret Mains and her infant son, a story that really shines a light on the desperate reality for a young woman completely trapped by her circumstances.
And it all kicked off with these words right here. Picture this. It's April 10th, 1838. A grandmother, frustrated because she hasn't been paid for childcare, hands a 16-month-old baby back to his mother. And that one moment, that simple, frustrated act, well, it set in motion a tragedy born from pure desperation.
So to really get what would drive a mother to this point, you have to understand the world she was living in. And for Margaret Mains, back in 1838, her situation wasn't just tough, it was, by pretty much any measure, impossible.
So you've got the two central figures in this whole tragedy. On one side, the victim, baby William, only 16 months old, and on the other, the accused, his own mother, Margaret Mains. She was just 20 years old herself, barely more than a kid. You know, when you look at it, they were both trapped, and both just incredibly vulnerable.
I mean, the pressure Margaret was under was just immense. In 1838, being an unmarried mother, that was a social disaster. The baby's father was completely out of the picture, offering zero support. So to make ends meet, Margaret worked this grueling job at a flax mill, and she lived in a lodging house with a strict no kids allowed rule. This meant her only option was to leave her son with his grandmother, a really fragile setup that was about to come crashing down.
You know, in every story of desperation, there's always that one moment, the breaking point. And for Margaret, that's exactly what happened. Her private, quiet struggle suddenly blew up into this huge, immediate crisis that she just couldn't see a way out of. And things escalated so quickly. It's actually kind of chilling. On Tuesday, the grandmother brings the baby back. By Thursday morning, a doctor's looking at him for teething pain and notices the baby seems stupefied, like he's way too sleepy, not responsive. By that evening, it's a full-blown emergency. The doctor induces vomiting and figures out what's wrong, but it's already too late. By midnight, just a couple of hours later, baby William is gone.
So what happened in between? What happened in those crucial hours? Well, Margaret was stuck. She had a crying baby, and her landlady was threatening to kick her out. So she made a choice. She reached for something that was in almost every home at the time, just looking for a little bit of peace and quiet.
And this is really the key to the whole story. Laudanum. You have to understand, this wasn't some exotic, hard-to-find poison. No way. It was an opium-based tincture, kind of like the 19th century version of an all-purpose painkiller. People used it for everything, and it was super common to give it to infants to help with teething pain. It was cheap, it was legal, and pretty much everyone had a bottle in their house.
So, as her son lay dying, Margaret confessed. And her story, it wasn't one of malice. It was a story of pure desperation. She'd bought what was called a pennyworth of laudanum, a tiny amount, and gave the baby a single teaspoonful in some tea. Her reason? Not to hurt him, but simply to quiet the child, because her landlady was complaining about the noise.
But Margaret's story of a desperate act started to fall apart pretty quickly, especially when Dr. Ward, the physician who tried to save William, began his examination. The medical evidence just didn't line up. It pointed to a much larger dose.
And here's the number that changed everything. Dr. Ward estimated he recovered something like 50 to 60 drops of laudanum from the baby's stomach. Now, to put that in perspective, that's more than double what would be a fatal dose for a child William's age. You see, a single teaspoon? Maybe that's a tragic mistake. But this amount? This suggested it was deliberate.
So, on July 14, 1838, Margaret Mains found herself on trial for her life. And you have to understand, the court wasn't really interested in why she did it or what her circumstances were. They were there to look at the cold, hard facts and decide her fate.
And maybe the most damaging testimony of all came from Margaret's own landlady. She got on the stand and told the court that Margaret had pawned her baby's cap just to get money for breakfast, and then remarked, "Oh, he'll never need it." Now, was that just bleak resignation from a mother at the end of a rope? Or was it something darker? To the jury, it sounded an awful lot like the words of a cold-hearted killer.
The prosecution really built a powerful case. They had the story about her pawning the baby's clothes. They brought in witnesses who claimed that while drinking, she'd threatened to kill the baby and all of its breed. And on top of all that, they had Dr. Ward's medical testimony, which was pretty much irrefutable, a fatal overdose.
And then
The verdict came in. The jury, perhaps seeing some of the desperation behind the act, found her guilty, but not of murder. They said it was manslaughter, and they even added a strong recommendation for mercy. But the judge, Mr. Justice Williams, he completely ignored them. He handed down the harshest sentence he possibly could: transportation for the rest of her natural life.
In fact, the judge went on record saying he was not at all satisfied with the verdict. He was convinced that the size of the overdose, combined with her comments, was clear proof of intent. To him, the jury had been way too lenient, and he was determined to correct their perceived mistake with his sentence.
But Margaret's story doesn't just stop there, in the courtroom. That sentence, it effectively banished her from the entire world she knew. It was a tragic, brutal outcome in a society defined by misery and pretty unforgiving justice. A year after her trial, the sentence was carried out. Margaret Mains was put on a convict ship, the Marianne, along with 142 other convicts. Her destination was New South Wales, Australia, literally the other side of the planet, a place she was never, ever coming back from.
So when you step back and look at the whole thing, what do you see? This whole tragedy was really a product of its time. You had laudanum, this incredibly dangerous but common household remedy. You had the crushing social stigma of being an unmarried mother. And, maybe most importantly, there was absolutely no safety net, no welfare, no social services, nothing to help a young woman who is completely and utterly trapped.
And that really leaves us with this one haunting question, doesn't it? The hard evidence pointed towards murder, but her life, her circumstances, they just screamed desperation. So what was she? Was Margaret Mains a cold-blooded murderer, or was she a victim crushed by a society that offered her no support, no compassion, and in the end, no way out? The law gave its answer, but I think history is still trying to figure it out.